Welcome to the Tradie Wife Life podcast, brought to you by Tradies in Business, where we talk to tradie wives about their goals, their challenges, their hopes and dreams, and how their trade business can help with that. Well, listeners, welcome back. I'm coming from a new office, as you can see if you're doing the YouTube link. Now I've got a new background. It's all very new here. To ease us in, we are starting off with a very seasoned guest here on the TWL podcast, Nicole Davidson. Thank you so much for coming back to join us today. How are you?
I am very well, and it is always a pleasure to come and chat with you, Nick. So very happy that you've invited me back.
Likewise, I love chat. I could chat to you all day, every day, actually. And maybe that's got just a little bit of something to do with the fact that you can navigate a conversation like nobody I have ever met. As a negotiator, Nicole, I must admit, when we very first spoke to you, I think way back on the Tradies in Business podcast, we always come into a guest interview. We do a little bit of research, so we stalk around, and I'm thinking negotiation. Like, are you dealing with terrorists? Are you helping the police? What are you doing? This is also fascinating. And I've had the privilege of learning so much about you and what it is that you do. But lots of our listeners might be new listeners. Can you give us a bit of an understanding of how you came to be doing this amazing work that you do?
Yeah, we're really happy to. So it's a really unplanned destination that I've arrived in. So my background was very much in sort of big scale commercial work. I'm a qualified lawyer, but I worked in finance for a long time doing commercial insolvency, investment banking. That didn't really float my boat, so I moved into people development. I love helping people. I did that sort of in-house learning and development strategy for a little while before I started stepping into the front of the training room. I did that general communication skills, all sorts of things, until I fell into a position where I was purely teaching negotiation and conflict resolution, and I loved it. Absolutely found my passion. After a couple of years of doing that, I left and set up on my own because I didn't just want to be teaching. I needed to be doing. Yeah. So I knew that what I was teaching people worked, and I was getting stories and examples from my real work, my real experience. Yeah. That then fed into the training that I'm doing. So I've been running my business, helping people learn negotiation and conflict resolution skills and stepping in alongside them to help them through those difficult conversations for about 8 years now.
I love it. Now, I happen to know that you're a mum, and if I recall correctly, your kids are teens. So I reckon that those skills would be coming in very handy for you as a mum at the moment.
I'd like to say so, but I always come back to the fact that even the experts at Harvard say never negotiate with terrorists and children. And I am trying to instill some of these negotiation principles into my children, but until their brains are fully developed, it's a work in progress.
Yeah, totally.
So don't watch me negotiate at home. You would never hire me.
I'm a bit the same. And they're very good at triggering all of our emotional responses, our children, aren't they?
Indeed.
I think one of the best skills I learned at school was debating. I loved debating. I loved theatre and I loved acting, and not so much the singing and dancing stuff, but then transferring some of those skills that I'd learned as a younger child into debating at high school was one of my most favourite things to do. Not because I like to win an argument, but because I like the thinking on the feet and the brain space that gives you, because you can create that little pause where you have some thinking space whilst navigating a conversation. I think that'd be a lot of what it is that you do is taking the time, taking the breath and the space in that conversation to be able to put together a concise answer rather than letting the emotion trigger us and just bulldozing through a conversation like so many of us do.
Look, I think that is right. It's about, as you say, that pause to actually think about the implications of what you might be able to say. But I think the big difference between what you've described in debating and what I do is that it's not about trying to convince people. You know, you go into debate and you are there trying to convince people that you are right, they are wrong. If you take that approach into negotiation, you're going to end up in combat. And as I always like to say, conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. So for me, it's more about taking that time to really understand. And a big part of it is actually asking yourself the question, how do I know that's true, or am I making an assumption? So there's a lot of sort of reflecting going on during a conversation about that and being really curious.
Curiosity is such a buzzword at the moment. The last couple of years, it's been a real Term that describes perfectly the opportunity that we all have to gain a greater understanding. And I think to be fair, it's only something I've tripped over in probably the last 3 years. I'm thinking back to the very first conference we did. We had a wonderful lady come through and talk about people skills and management and leadership skills. And she was talking about curiosity there. And so it's something that I learned from her and adapted into my workspace really, really quickly. But I've actually found it's had more success with my adult children. At the time they were teens, now they're all adults, and they have some questionable decisions at times, and so that curiosity and trying to understand how they thought or what led them to make those decisions or what impact they think it might had really created an opportunity for understanding rather than conflict, which I think really is the aim of the game, isn't it?
Absolutely. That is totally the aim. We can't involve ourselves with people and try and change their situation or their thinking unless we actually understand where they're starting from. And we can only do that when we really take the time to listen and understand them.
So I've got a question then. When you are dealing with someone that doesn't want to listen, how on earth do you navigate that exchange? It's not really a conversation because they're not listening. So how do you navigate that?
Look, I think that the first piece of advice I would always give someone in that situation is ask questions of them and demonstrate that you're really listening to them.
Mhm.
And this is where I say you're really listening, because we can listen, but while we're listening, we could be judging what somebody says. We can be thinking how we're going to convince them that they're wrong, and we're not really listening. So you really need to be doing expert listening, where you're actually listening to understand them.
Mm.
You're actually demonstrating that through asking reflective questions that show that you've actually heard what they're saying and that you're willing to listen. You have to demonstrate understanding without agreement.
Mm.
And, once you've done them the courtesy of really listening, the likelihood that they're going to be willing to hear you is increased. You can never guarantee it. There are some people who are just not nice people, never going to be great to deal with. They don't know how to be better.
Yeah.
But for most people, you can do that. And part of that's because when we are feeling that somebody is genuinely listening to us, our body will generally release oxytocin, which is the happy hormone.
Yeah.
So we can actually make someone feel much more positive and happy by really listening to them. We crave it. It's why people pay so much money to counselors.
Yes.
Because how nice is it when you paid money and somebody is there just listening to you?
Yeah. There's a lot to be said for the validation of somebody's feelings, whether you agree or not. That's actually not part of the conversation. It's the validation that somebody feels the way they feel, because we can't control the way we feel. Unfortunately, we would all love to. That'd be a great thing to master, and yet that stuff just comes up subconsciously or unconsciously for us. And so to have somebody validate that, I'm feeling upset or I'm feeling cranky or I'm feeling hurt about whatever the situation is, go a long way then to lowering those barriers that we have there invisibly that mean that I'm not listening or hearing you. It's such a courteous and simple thing to do.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting, and I see this, I notice this even with myself when I'm not focused on listening properly. It's so easy to go in with a really positive mindset. You're there to listen and help somebody, but you can find yourself jumping into giving advice and solving their problem for them really quickly. And often that's not what people need.
Mm.
And so the better listening, and what I've had to learn to do, and what I'm conscious of doing when I'm working with people in conflict, is I'm actually listening to help them understand their own perspective. And I'm being much more of a coach, allowing them to come up with their own solutions, and I'm helping them test those and, take them for a test drive,
Mm.
rather than actually saying, "Oh, well, this happened to me and this is what I did. You should do this," which is what we often do
Mm.
when we're talking to people and they're, in need. But it's
Oh,
much more powerful to let them solve their own problem,
absolutely it is. It's
unless they're asking for an answer.
of
That's
course.
different.
Yeah, totally agree. I see this in there's that age old, I don't even know what you'd call it, perhaps social commentary, where we've got to let the husband think that they came up with the idea in the first place and they're more likely to adopt it. That's pretty much what you've just explained, realistically. But I also love listening to help somebody understand their own, I forget your wording, but it was their own journey or their own position. And I think that's fantastic because when I think about when I'm elevated or I'm emotional or I'm not really connecting with what I'm going through, I would love always that opportunity to come back and understand, well, what is it that I'm actually going through? What is it that I've actually just languaged, or what is it that I've just experienced, rather than talking at a high level of, um, it's not even explanation. Well, perhaps it's explanation without understanding. So I love the idea of really helping somebody connect with that understanding of their position.
Because what we tend to have is we know at a high level what we're feeling and we try and fix that. But it's really understanding, why am I feeling like that? What is underlying it? So there's a technique that's used in management consulting called the 5 whys, and it originally came out of Toyota. You know it.
Yeah, I love it.
And it's like, I always use, I'm not very good at mechanics, but it's like, okay, so if the problem is that the tire keeps wearing on the right hand side, you ask yourself why. You could just go, well, the tire's worn, we'll fix the tire. We'll replace the tire and fix it. Problem solved. Having done that, though, you're going to find that the tire wears in the same place again. Why? Because we only fixed the surface problem. So you ask yourself, well, why is it wearing there? Okay, well, it's because the wheels are out of alignment. Okay, then you go, okay, well, we could just fix the wheel alignment, but still we might have a problem. So why is the wheel out of alignment? Well, that's because when I park the car, I have a tendency to smack it into the curb. And that knocks the wheels out of alignment. So really what I need to solve is learning to park better, and that will fix my problem. So, you know, my husband would agree that that is actually what I do too. But putting that aside, the problem is we so often stop at that surface level problem. I'm
Yes.
feeling annoyed. Why? Well, because my apprentice isn't doing what they've said that they're going to do. I'm frustrated with them. Okay, well, let's look a bit more. Rather than just going and having a conversation, going, you need to do what you're told. Maybe we actually need to dig a little bit deeper. What's going on? What's driving them to not follow those instructions? What's actually digging in at a sort of deeper level?
That's a fantastic tool. It's one that Warwick talks about all the time, the 5 whys. And you've really concreted something for me yesterday in a conversation I was having. And now I can go back to them and give them that tool or remind them of the tool. In a coaching session, one of our clients were trying to motivate a team member to do something and they couldn't understand why they weren't doing it. The simple answer is we'll go and ask them. However, it's very rare that somebody gives you immediately the real reason why they're not motivated to do something. And so I was explaining to them the subtext that isn't often the words, it's what's not being said in a conversation. I got off the coaching call and I thought, wow, it took me a really, really long time to understand subtext and to learn how to listen for a subtext in a conversation. It's part of coaching, I feel, and some of those skills that are necessary for us to help motivate clients to understand what their real issue is. And then as you're saying that, I'm realizing, oh my goodness, I just need to go back to them and re-explain the 5 whys so they can utilize that skill, because that's exactly what they're doing. They're getting to the subtext of the conversation by asking a few questions. It's such a clever tool.
Yeah, and look, I think the important thing is, and particularly where you are dealing with staff, where there's a power imbalance and there's potentially a real resistance because they're scared of telling you their real why,
Mm.
if they've even thought about it. So the importance of building the relationship and making them feel safe
Yeah.
is so critical, because you can ask somebody all the reasons in the world. You can ask them, why is that happening? What are they doing? If the relationship's not solid, all you're going to hear is what they think you want to hear.
Yes. That is so incredibly true. Nicole, we're supposed to be talking about apprentices, and I was laughing with you before the call because I get told all the time all apprentices are just shit, and I wanted to know whether you believed that was true or not.
Well, I've never had an apprentice, but I can almost certainly say I can't imagine that they're all shit.
No, I don't.
Um, so there's probably a few things going on that might make people think that they're shit. And I suspect a lot of them stem from miscommunication.
I totally agree. In my own, I've had some fantastic apprentices. Let me preface this conversation by saying that because maybe they'll listen, maybe they won't. And I don't know that it is honestly because of my recruitment or even because of my communication skills. I think there's been some other stuff. A, I've been lucky. B, some good firm HR structure has certainly helped with that. And I think over time, learning how to communicate in a way that they understand has been really important. So, Nicole, what I wanted to ask you was generally where we see lazy or unmotivated apprentices, what are some of the other possibilities about what really could be going on?
Yeah. So, look, it could be that, look, there could be so much going on. But if we're talking about the apprentice who comes across as being lazy and unmotivated, it could be that, it could just be that they're in a job that they don't want to be in.
Yeah.
That is absolutely one of the options, and that they're not there for the right reasons. The other might be that they've never had a picture painted for them about what the process is and how they're going to develop. I'm imagining I've not had a lot of experience working in trades, but I'm imagining some of the things that the apprentices get to do might be kind of not the most exciting jobs, not requiring, too much thinking or responsibility, and that can be frustrating.
Mm.
So it's really important when you've got that kind of repetitive or not exciting task that you don't just give the apprentice that you find opportunities to give them something that's a bit more interesting from time to time,
Mhm.
but also helping them really understand why this task is so important. Okay, yes, you're going to, I don't know, I'm going to make stuff up out of my head now. Please delete it if it's completely wrong.
Yeah.
But, maybe it's like you're going to spend 3 hours just hammering nails into stuff, like a production line. Why is it important that you do this well and you get it done on time? Well, maybe it's about, actually there's some real learnings about, maybe it's really important how straight a nail goes in. Maybe it's about getting processes and finding, as you do this, it's about learning how to be efficient. Maybe it's about building focus and making sure that precision is important. What is it that they're learning that's going to help them? And I guess sharing stories, for the senior person that's supervising, it's sharing stories, but not sharing stories as in, I had to do this crap, you've got to do it too. But I had to do this when I was apprentice. I actually discovered later that what was so good about that was that I'd got these things. Now, once again, some people will respond better to that than others. Some will go, yeah, whatever, old man, don't care. Some will go, well, hang on, can't I just learn because you've done it? Why do I have to go through it myself?
Yeah.
They're cool. But, bringing that in, and I think recognizing as well for the apprentice, look, I get that this isn't exciting. I get that it's hard to motivate you. What can we do to make it more fun? Is it putting music on? Is it taking more breaks? Is it, what can we do for you to make it easier for you to stay motivated here?
Just about everything you just described falls back to communication. And I think when we're busy and we're rushed and we're stressed and we can't understand why somebody's not doing what we tell them to do, it's very hard for us to effectively communicate. So, do you have some basic tips or skills that people could be practicing in terms of giving instruction and then receiving the feedback?
Yeah, so look, I think there's a couple of things. One is, and you talked earlier about recruitment. So I think everything starts at recruitment. And that is doing an interview where it's not just asking the questions about what you need to know, which typically will be closed questions. So it's, can you do this? Do you understand this? All of those sort of closed questions. In your actual recruitment process, you need to be getting to know the person and already starting that process of building relationship, finding out who they are, what their goals and ambitions are. Once again, taking into account that they're in an interview, they're going to try to impress. So being really human about that and going, really, that's interesting. What does that look like? But just trying to make them comfortable so that you actually get the real person.
Yep.
Then it's really, I think, as you said, one of the challenges is that when we're actually out on site doing this work, it's normally time pressured. You're trying to get things done as quickly as possible. So I think it's really important to carve out time outside of that where you can actually sit down and do a review of the week. What's gone on, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Acknowledge that sometimes your instructions might not be 100% clear. One of the things that I do, and I run a program around how to delegate more effectively, there's actually 9 steps in that process.
Love that.
And now you'd think I'd remember all of those 9 steps. I can't guarantee I will, but, it's things like, first of all, set out what is the outcome? What is, the key things is what's the learning opportunity, and particularly for those more boring tasks, it's important to give them, why is it that they're going to benefit from doing this boring task? What are the red flags? What are the things that as you're going through this, if this happens, you need to come and seek further instruction because this could be a problem. So thinking ahead, what could go wrong in this task so that they don't make a mistake and then panic because they think they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
They come to you earlier and seek guidance. What are the resources that they've got available to help them? So, if you can't do this, well, here's the instruction manual, or here's a YouTube video, or here's somebody else on site that you can talk to if I'm not available. So giving them all of those resources. So I think sometimes the instructions, and this is where the curse of knowledge comes in. If you're an experienced trader, you know what it means when you say, go and put this widget on this machine.
Yep.
You know exactly all of the steps that are involved. And it's really hard when you know something to that level to break it down to the pieces. So, other tips would be, and this is where time comes in, demonstrate.
Yep.
Ask the person, have you done this before? What challenges did you face last time? What extra information do you need? I think we've got to be realistic about what the apprentices are capable of. And I find this with my children too.
Yeah.
It's like, go and do this. And they're like, what? So I think it's that balance because we do want them to come in and step up.
Yes.
But we need to realise that sometimes people need to do things a couple of times. They need to see it. Once again, there's different learners. Some will go, let me watch a YouTube video and then I'll be able to do it. Some actually need to do it with you giving them guidance. So it's actually getting to know your apprentice and what their learning style is to a little bit as well.
They are some of the best tips I think I've ever heard on delegation. That's such an important resource to be able to delegate well and effectively. And I don't think we're never taught how to delegate. It's very hard to understand that might be part of the problem when you just have a team that aren't doing what you want them to do. So I think that's really important. And listeners, if you or your partner struggle with delegation, or you can see some of these consistent issues that you're facing in your business, I strongly recommend that you check out Nicole and the resources she has available and the courses that she has available. We're going to give you some more details at the back end of the episode so that you can easily find Nicole. Nicole, one of the most important things we need to be able to do as an employer is give critical feedback. And yet this is an area where I see a lot of challenge. Are there some tips that you can give on giving effective critical feedback?
Most people hate giving negative feedback. And there's reasons for that. One is where if you think of yourself as a nice person, giving critical feedback actually challenges your self-identity. If you are worried that the other person's going to get upset or they're going to cry, it's going to cause you to feel anxiety. So there's real reasons why this can be difficult. So the first thing I'd say is the best way to enhance your ability to give critical feedback is to give positive feedback often. So I talk about building the emotional bank account. If when somebody does something good, and I know I'm guilty of this, where I only tell my kids when they've done something naughty.
Yeah.
Or they haven't done something, and I often forget to praise them for when they've done the right thing.
Yes.
So you've got to be noticing when they're doing the right thing. You've got to be noticing just them being nice people. And so giving them positive feedback, so pleased that I can really tell you're making an effort to be here on time every day. That is fantastic. I really appreciate it. It's not about even what they're doing. It's just about them as a person. So the more you can kind of give that on a regular basis, you're building up this relationship and this emotional bank account so that when you have to give negative feedback, that's a withdrawal out of the account, but there's enough in there that it can sustain it. You're not going into overdraft.
Love it.
So that's my first point. If all you ever do is give critical feedback, it's going to be very difficult for them to listen. The other thing about feedback is to be effective, there's a couple of things that need to happen. One is they have to hear it.
Yep.
Now, probably in tradie world, this is easier than in offices because in offices, what I find is often people give the feedback in an email. How do you even know they've read it?
Yeah, that's so true.
So, they need to have heard it. Now, even if I'm face to face with my apprentice giving some feedback, they might not be hearing it because they've got such a wall of resistance. They're not feeling safe. So I need to make sure that they're in a place where they can hear it. I'm not going to give feedback in front of their peers. Obviously, I'm going to do it privately. So that's the thing. So they have to hear it. They have to understand it. Now, this becomes a problem. If you are someone who is nervous about giving feedback, you might sugarcoat it a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's not a big deal, but if next time you could just do this,
Yeah.
all they hear is it's not a big deal.
Yes.
So you've got to be really clear about how you give the feedback. They have to agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't agree with it, they're not going to change their behaviour. And then they have to be motivated enough to change the behaviour. So that's where you're looking. So what I would say, first of all, is if you've given feedback and nothing has changed, you actually need to go back and say, what level is it failed at? Yep. Is it that they didn't hear? Well, they heard and they understood, but they disagree with what I'm saying. It's going to be a very different conversation. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of your first framework. And, that's really where you've given feedback and it hasn't worked. But in terms of giving the feedback, there's a whole range of stuff that I could talk about. And once again, I can do a whole day program just on giving feedback. But effectively, what you've got to do is be really specific.
Yep.
So it's talking about what was exactly done. What did you notice? What did you observe? What was the impact of that? How could it have been different? But the other thing is it's got to be a two-way conversation. So the way I start would be something like, look, what I've seen is that when you've been doing this task, I've observed X, Y, and Z. What that means is it's actually costing us more money. It's actually, we've had a few complaints because the customers are concerned, the clients are concerned that things are taking too long. And so it's really important that we need to do something. Can you tell me what's your perspective on that? Mm. Okay. And so I'm actually asking, so I'm going in and I'm trying to say, well, look, this is what I've seen, but there might be something I don't know.
Yep.
So it once again comes in with that sense of curiosity to go, I know what I know. This is one side of a story, but there might be something that I don't know, that there's a reason that what happened. So making sure that you go in and giving them that opportunity to give their perspective is really important.
I can recall my dad. So for listeners, Dad's a plasterer and he had his own business. And I can recall when I was a young teen having conversations around the dinner table about somebody he had recently employed that did not wear deodorant. Now, I live in Queensland. It was summer. It was hot. And Dad had decided he needed to have a difficult conversation with him about wearing deodorant. Now, my dad's this is where I get it from, quite forthright. He's very direct. He's open to having challenging conversations. But because this was about a personal attribute, he found this really tough. And my recollection, and it might be wrong, so long ago now, is that it ended up in quite terse words and the guy never came back to work again. And so are those same tips that you've just given the right steps to follow if we have to talk about somebody's personal attributes? Because it's going to, if I'm just approaching a job in a wrong way, I have a choice about how I react to some extent. But if it's something about me personally, that triggers me to be very hurt and upset, and I can't necessarily control my reaction. Is there a different way to approach that conversation? Should I need to have it?
Look, I think you need to have a bit more recognition of the potential impact on the person. But once again, I'd be thinking clearly about, okay, so, and it's amazing how often when I do feedback courses, the issue about deodorant comes up.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I must tell Dad. He'll feel much better.
Absolutely. I remember when I worked at Target back when I was at uni, there was one girl who worked on the checkouts who really needed some assistance, and there was many discussions about who was going to tell her. So the idea there would be, why is this an issue? And so starting with, I'm just letting you know, I'm not sure if you're aware, some of the other guys have been complaining. They're a bit worried about your scent.
Yep.
It's pretty warm. We're all getting a bit sweaty. Is there something going on for you? We're assuming that you're not wearing deodorant. It might be wrong. Is there something going on? So it's pretty vague. it is uncomfortable. Like even me who specializes in this, if I had to have that conversation with someone, it would be uncomfortable. But I go in with the assumption, gosh, maybe they're allergic to deodorant.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe there's actually something really going on that means that they can't do it.
Yep. That's a great way to look at it. We can always pop under the air conditioning vent so they're not sweating quite so much, although I don't know how that's going to go on a trade side. I am a bit of
Personal fan on their hat or something.
exactly. I'm a bit of a fan, and I don't know whether this is something that I should be doing or not, but I'm thinking about my children now, and I've had less of a problem having some of those personal conversations with them than I have with somebody that I don't have that kind of tight connection with. But I'm thinking about having to give my kids some bad news. I've had to give my kids some bad news recently, and I always preface the conversation with, I'm about to tell you something you don't want to hear, or I'd call it an anchor. I'm kind of letting them know that this is going to be an uncomfortable conversation. Is that actually a skill, or is it something that we should be doing to prepare someone for something that they don't want to hear?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, coming back to the deodorant conversation, I think it's perfectly reasonable to start that going, look, I need to have a conversation with you. I actually don't feel very comfortable having this, and I think it's going to be quite awkward.
Yep.
But I also think it's important enough that if I don't have this, it's going to have a negative impact for you.
Yeah, that's a great
So
way to frame it.
absolutely, I think starting it that way actually helps, because the risk of not starting it with something like that is that you go in at a bullet a gate, and because you are nervous, because you're uncomfortable, you're more likely to just go into that. People are noticing that you don't wear deodorant, it smells, you've got to put deodorant on. Is that okay? And then they go, yeah, okay.
Yeah. And you don't feel safe, and it set up a dreadful dynamic moving forward. I have witnessed some of those conversations. It's really uncomfortable to watch. I wonder if overall, if there are some other areas that you feel that employers could improve their communication in.
I think once again, it's within the challenge of managing time and all of the obligations on an employer to manage jobs and do all of that. And I think there's got to be a real balance as well.
Mm.
I think the encouragement to listen to employees and get feedback, but also being clear that they don't run the business.
Yes.
And I think, it's interesting. I sort of look at some things and, the swing between employer and employee sort of goes backwards and forwards. It seems to be at a really employee focused end at the moment.
Yes.
And, I think setting boundaries and being clear with people about, I'm not going to dictate everything. I'm going to listen to you, which sort of brings me to another model that I talk about. When you are the employer, there are things that you can choose whether or not to negotiate with employees. So when you've got an issue, you can basically do one of three things. One is you can negotiate it. The second is you consult with the employees, or the third is you can just direct them.
Yep.
And so when you've got an issue, what you want to do, so that the negotiation is where you work together and you agree the solution. The consulting is, I want to hear what your perspective is, but ultimately I'm going to make that call and you've got no say in it.
Mhm.
And then the inform is, I'm just going to tell you and I don't even care what you think about it.
Yep.
So as an employer, the more that you try and find things that you can put into the negotiate bucket, or find things that you can put into the consult bucket, that gives people that sense of ownership. The real challenge is being really clear from the beginning, because the biggest problem you have is where you go and you seek people's feedback and they think you're negotiating, but actually you're in the consult bucket. So being clear about when you're asking for their opinion, being clear about what you're going to do with that opinion, manages their expectations. If they understand from the beginning that you might ignore their information, that's okay. But if they think that we're negotiating and working together and you don't listen to them, then you actually create bad blood.
Sometimes when I listen to all of the tips, it can feel like it's really hard. And I feel as though with the blessing of time, communication is not that hard. It's when I look at specifically trade business owners and I think about the opportunities to communicate, this is not just with apprentices, this is with clients or with other team members or with suppliers. It doesn't really matter who they're speaking with. The problem is they don't have, or they don't create enough time to have a conversation that is measured and considered. And instead, often we run into something similar to you describing before, the conversation about the deodorant, when we're feeling nervous and time pressured, and we just sort of run at it as a bull at a gate. And so it always becomes, you do what I say, rather than, well, let's have a conversation and perhaps move into the consult or the negotiate buckets. Is there can it be that simple? Can some good time and some consideration be enough to change the way you communicate?
I think there's a couple of things that come out from that. One is most people have never been taught how to prepare for these conversations. So if you've actually got a system and a process that you can use and you can prepare for the conversation in advance, which does take time, so you've got to understand the value of that investment, then that gives you a better chance of success. The other thing I think that's really important is we're all human. We are all going to make mistakes from time to time. And as I said, I'm a communication, negotiation, conflict specialist, and there are still conversations I go in and go, why did I say that?
Yes.
Taking the time particularly when you've got those conversations that haven't gone the way you wanted, just taking 5 minutes to just ask yourself, what did I do there that I could do differently next time? Because as you said, there is so much when you break it down, and there's this model and there's that model and there's all these things. I always say either just focus on one thing. Like as you've been listening to this podcast, there might be one thing that stuck out for you. Now, you could easily forget that. But if there's one thing that you go, you know what, if I implement that, it's going to make my conversations much better. Write it down, focus on it. Before a conversation or after a conversation, come back and go, did I do that?
Yeah.
And just pick one thing, because if you try to implement everything, it's too much. And so having that ability to just focus on one aspect of communication at a time, and then just going back and reviewing conversations saying, what could I have done better there? That's how you're going to keep improving.
Let's say, so thinking about that and the opportunity for reflection and review, I've had a difficult situation with one of my apprentices or one of my team members. Conversation hasn't gone the way I wanted it to. I get back and I review and I think, wow, I probably shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have reacted that way. Should we be saying sorry?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The power of an apology is phenomenal. And it might be that the apprentice goes, oh, I didn't even notice.
Yes.
But they still appreciate that you've apologised. And taking responsibility. I mean, one is you want your apprentices to take responsibility. So modelling that behaviour is critical, rather than brushing it aside or making excuses going, oh, yeah, but I was too busy. That's why I said it. And no, if you actually go, you know what? I actually should have made more time for this conversation. I realised I rushed into it. I hadn't really thought about it. I was far too aggressive in my tone of voice. I'm really sorry. I'd like to have another go at having that conversation. When would be a good time?
I think there's so much power in an apology, and unfortunately, I see far too many people feel as though, particularly in that staff setting, that it weakens their position. I believe it strengthens their position.
I agree.
It's exactly as you said, the modeling of ownership and acceptance that I could have done a better job in this, rather than steamrolling and bullying. It's essentially bullying to not take responsibility for that behavior that and even
It's
if you haven't,
gaslighting, isn't it? It's like, no, it's all your fault.
absolutely it is. And even if you haven't taken the time to stop and reflect and review, because you got that niggling feeling in your tummy, that you could have done a better job of that exchange. And so that's your opportunity to at least reflect on the fact that that didn't go the way you wanted it to, and let the other person know. Even if you're not in a space yet where you're ready to take ownership, you can at least take ownership for a part and acknowledge that this did not go the way that I had intended it to. Let's come back and revisit at a time that's more suitable for both of us and start again. That's not a hard thing to do.
Get advice, have a chat to someone else. And it doesn't have to be someone like me who's an expert, but just getting that person who's slightly removed from the problem to just talk it through can be really powerful to help you know what to do next time. And you know, I know people, mostly when I use the word role play, people kind of roll their eyes and go, oh, disgusting. But there is nothing more powerful than actually role playing that conversation. What could go wrong? How am I going to address it if it happens? You know, preparation is so critical.
It is. Role play is still the number one thing, or your segment with role play with our lovely Renata last year. Still the number one highlight of everybody's conference experience last year. It
I
was
love it.
just, well, it was so much fun to really see how, with thought and preparation, a conversation can go very differently to the way you assume it's going to go, and a little bit of practice around that area. And our lovely Renata is one of the best communicators I've come across, and we even had her at in occasions up against the wall thinking, I don't know my way out of this, as she role played the consumer that was being super unreasonable. It was just fascinating to watch how clever communication can really change the outcome. Nicole, thank you so much for yet again joining and sharing so many of your tips today. If our lovely listeners would like to find out more about what you do and how you potentially help them, or how they could work with you, where should they go to find you?
They can head straight to my website, nicoledavidsonnegotiation.com.au. And where you've got specific issues, I have what I call the negotiation GP service. So you can actually book just a half-hour consult to talk through a real live issue and help you prepare and plan so that you can go into that with more confidence.
I cannot advocate highly enough the opportunity that's available to you there, where you have those stressful conversations. And I see this really frequently, unfortunately, with clients, or where you're a sub-trade building with an unreasonable builder. If you go in with some mindset and some better skills, and you're upgrading the conversations that you're having, you really can turn around that somewhat unpleasant exchange and hopefully find a better resolution for both of you. So please take the time to check out Nicole and all that she offers. Nicole, thank you so much for your time.
It's always a pleasure, Nick. Thank you.
Likewise. We'll chat again soon.